Welcome back, guys. Today we are going to discuss this topic of cellular messengers and the receptors. Cellular messengers, as we also known as the hormones. Cellular messengers, as we also known as the hormones. These hormones, we're going to see this how they are classification into four classes. These hormones are the cellular messenger divided into four classes. First class is the single amino acid derivative. First class of hormone are the single amino acid derivatives. For example, I'm going to say an amino acid tyrosine. This amino acid tyrosine derived are the thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones are derived from this tyrosine amino acid. Also, the catecholamines group, which are the hormones, this epinephrine, norepinephrine and dopamine. This catecholamines group, epinephrine, norepinephrine and dopamine are derived from this tyrosine. Also, the thyroid hormones are derived from tyrosine amino acid. Next amino acid we are going to see is tryptophan. From tryptophan, this serotonin is derived. From arginine, this important compound nitric oxide is derived. Nitric oxide, arginine is an important one. From arginine, nitric oxide is derived. Next classification is multiple amino acids. Multiple amino acids derivatives. These are the protein hormones. For example, composed of 51 amino acids. Very common example of insulin. Insulin is composed of 51 amino acids. Then composed of 84 amino acids is parathormone. Parathormone involved in the calcium homeostasis is composed of 84 amino acids. These are the multiple amino acid derivatives. This multiple amino acid derivatives are protein hormones. Remember, can't cross cell membrane. Important point to be noted here is they can't cross the cell membrane. They act on receptors. Which receptors? Membrane receptors. These protein hormones can't cross cell membrane. They act on the membrane receptors. The third type we are going to see is important cholesterol derivatives. Third derivative is cholesterol derivative. These are the steroid hormones. The steroids, for example, the sex steroids. Sex steroids such as estrogen, progesterone, so very common examples. Testosterone, estrogen and progesterone in females, testosterone in males. Then the adrenal cortex steroids, such as aldosterone, cortisol. So there are these steroid words. So these are cholesterol derivatives, the steroid hormones, sex steroids and the adrenal cortex steroids. Fact to remember here in these cholesterol derivatives, they easily cross the membrane, cross the cell membrane. They act through intracellular receptors. Intracellular receptors. That through these intracellular receptors, they easily cross through the membrane and act through the intracellular receptors, that is, receptors present inside the cell. The fourth type we are going to see is some vitamins which act as hormones. The vitamins which act as hormones such as vitamin A and vitamin D. Very important, these are fat soluble vitamins. This vitamin in higher concentrations act as hormones. Their receptor, remember, is intracellular receptors. The vitamins which act as hormones, their receptors are intracellular. So you have seen 4 types of hormone classification: single amino acid derivatives, multiple amino acid proteins, cholesterol, and the vitamins which at greater concentration act as hormones. Next we are going to see this discussion of receptors. First you have seen these cellular messengers or the hormones. Now we are going to see these receptors. These receptors classification, to see how they are classified. The 2 types. These are the membrane receptors and the intracellular receptors. The classification hormone discussion, we have seen 2 types of receptors: this membrane receptors and intracellular receptors. These membrane receptors are also known as extracellular receptors. Extracellular receptors. Extracellular or membrane and intracellular receptors. Examples of these extracellular are G protein coupled receptors, then tyrosine kinase receptors, then the Janus kinase receptors. Janus kinase receptors or JAK receptors. Next one is serine kinase receptors. So you have seen from all these examples that there are this kinase word. This kinase word, the tyrosine, Janus kinase, and serine kinase receptors, along with the G protein coupled receptors, are membrane or extracellular receptors. These intracellular receptors are further divided into cytoplasmic and nucleus or nuclear. Cytoplasmic receptors and nuclear receptors. So we are going to see some of these examples further ahead. Now let's discuss these extracellular receptors or membrane receptors one by one. First one we are going to discuss is the membrane receptors. First one is G protein coupled receptors, the GPCRs, G protein coupled receptors. In the cytoskeletal filament section, we have seen that these GPCRs are, for examples of transmembrane protein. These are the transmembrane proteins. Examples of transmembrane proteins are these G protein coupled receptors. So we're going to see how they are located. So this is a cell membrane. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the membrane. These receptors span across the membrane 7 times, span across the membrane 7 times. So these are called serpentine receptors. These receptors are called serpentine receptors. They span across the membrane 7 times. So we're going to see there are 3 subunits of this G protein coupled receptor. There are 3 subunits of GPCR: alpha, beta and gamma. This alpha subunit, beta subunit and gamma subunit of GPCR. So we are going to see how they work, function. So suppose this is the GPCR, just spanning across the membrane. To this we have this hormone comes. This is the GPCR. This hormone is called a ligand. This hormone is a ligand for this GPCR across the membrane, that spans across the membrane. We have seen that it contains 3 subunits. So I'm going to see this is the alpha subunit, this beta subunit, there is the gamma subunit. 3 subunits attached to the GPCR are this alpha subunit, beta subunit and gamma subunit. We have seen before. Now when this hormone, which is the ligand, comes in contact with GPCR, this hormone, which is the ligand for this receptor, comes in contact with the GPCR, activates this G protein coupled receptor. What we mean by this activation, that the alpha subunit separated. This alpha subunit separated means there is activation of GPCR. This alpha subunit gets separated. You want to see after this the alpha subunit gets separated. To this alpha subunit a molecule of GTP gets attached. Molecule of GTP gets attached. This alpha subunit has intrinsic GTPase activity. This alpha subunit has GTPase activity. So when this alpha subunit gets separated, it finally leads to this GTP plus alpha subunit. This has this GTPase activity, leading to formation of GDP. This GTP coming in contact with this alpha subunit, which gets separated on activation of G-coupled receptor, has this intrinsic GTPase activity. It hydrolyzes this GTP to form GDP. So a simple explanation: this hormone comes in contact, which is the ligand for this receptor. The 3 subunits alpha, beta and gamma. From this the alpha subunit gets detached, which has this intrinsic GTPase activity. The GTP molecules then get attached to this alpha subunit, causes hydrolysis and formation of GDP. So I'm going to see this active state and inactive state of the GPCR subunits. In this active state, this alpha subunits get separated from beta and gamma subunits, and there attaches a molecule of GTP. In the inactive state, all the 3 molecules are attached to each other. After the hydrolysis, this GDP is formed and is attached to the alpha subunit. Remember, In active state, GTP is attached. Sorry, in the active state, in which the detached alpha unit from beta and gamma subunits. In the inactive state, this GTP is attached, in which the three subunits are together. So we've seen this, how this GPCR acts, this G protein coupled receptor on the serpentine receptor, spanning across the membranes 7 times, its action and its active state and inactive states. Now we are going to see that how this GPCR actually conveys the message. So we have this membrane. This is the membrane. Suppose this is the G protein coupled receptor. G protein coupled receptor across the membrane. Example of transmembrane protein, as we have seen before. This hormone denoted as H. This hormone, which is a ligand or a first messenger. This hormone, which is a ligand for the receptor, is considered to be a first messenger. It comes in contact with the GPCR and it activates another type of messaging system called second messenger system. This hormone, which is a ligand for this GPCR, considered to be the first messenger, which on coming on contact with the GPCR activates a second set of messenger system called second messenger system. So we're going to see what is this second messenger system. Second messenger system, it's generally of 3 types. I want to see the 3 types. The first one is cyclic AMP, adenosine monophosphate cyclic AMP. Second one is cyclic GMP, guanosine monophosphate. The third one is our common calcium ion. We have seen in this, in the cell membrane module, there we have seen this inosine monophosphate, this IP3 DAG system, in which this calcium acts as the second messenger system. See, IP3 DAG calcium system. This is the whole name we have given this. So generally these 3 systems act in the similar fashion. These 3 systems goes inside the cell. They are inside the cell and they activate certain protein kinases. They activate certain protein kinases inside the cell. They activate certain protein kinases. On activation of this protein kinases, they induce phosphorylation of proteins. Then this phosphorylation of proteins, which leads to a downstream actions. So the second messenger system, the cyclic AMP, cyclic GMP and calcium, that goes inside the cell and activates certain protein kinases. These protein kinases are the enzymes. These are activated, which then induces phosphorylation of the proteins. Phosphorylation of proteins leads to formation of the phosphoproteins, as we know, and it leads to a downstream of actions. Certain actions are performed, which leads to the effect of these hormones. That depends on the second messenger system of action. So As we have seen before here, GPCR acts to the second messenger system. I'm going to see how this GPCR acts through three different second messenger system. So this GPCR is the first CMP, the GMP and calcium. This CMP, because of alpha subunit, because of the alpha subunit, we have three types of alpha subunits. We have a GS. GS stands for stimulatory. Stimulatory. What stimulates what? It increases CAMP levels. GS, as for stimulatory, it increases the CAMP levels. And we have GI, I for inhibitory. Simple to understand. This GI, I for inhibitory, it obviously decreases CMP levels. This GS is stimulator and this GI is inhibitory, increases and decreases the CMP levels respectively. Now this GMP acts through the third type of subunit, GQ. So GS, GI, the GQ through which the CGMP acts. This GQ increases the calcium levels. Eventually it increases the calcium levels. The third is calcium. Now this calcium we have seen this GQ increases the calcium levels. The CGMP through this GQ in rods and cones, especially in rods and cones, it activates a compound called transducin. We will see how this transducin is important in the vitamin A lectures in biochemistry modules. For this, remember, this activates in the rods and cones this transducin. This activation of transducin leads to activation of phosphodiesterase. Phosphodiesterase enzyme is activated, which leads to hydrolysis of CGMP. Leads to hydrolysis of CGMP, leads to decrease in CGMP levels. Hydrolysis of CGMP by phosphodiesterase enzyme leads to decrease in levels of CGMP. So this transducin in rods and cones in the eyes. This calcium also acts through the GQ subunit. This GQ subunit eventually increases the calcium levels, which further leads to the downstream actions of calcium. There are downstream actions of calcium also acts to this GQ subunit. We have seen this CMP, CGMP and calcium, how GPCR acts through these three types of second messenger system. Now we are going to see an important concept. This GS alpha subunit, we have seen this GS for stimulatory, which increases the CMP adenylyl cyclase levels. This GS alpha subunit increases the CAMP adenylyl cyclase levels. So there is a concept called gain of function. There is this gain of function mutation. This gain of function mutation leads to a very increase in the CMP levels. beyond the normal level, very much increase in the CMP levels, which leads to precocious puberty. Some skeletal abnormalities and type of skin pigmentation called cafe av late spots. Cafe av late spots. This skin pigmentation type is called cafe av late spots. So these features of precocious puberty, skeletal abnormalities, and skin pigmentation called cafe av late spots. These are features of syndrome called McCune, C-U-N-E, McCune Albright syndrome. Very important syndrome, clinical important. This McCune Albright syndrome is due to gain of function mutation of this GS alpha subunit, which leads to very much increase in CMP levels beyond normal required levels, which leads to features such as precocious puberty ascends very much earlier than it is required. There are some skeletal abnormalities due to defect in the growth. There is a skin pigmentation, this type of pigmentation called cafe av late spots. These are properties of McCune Albright syndrome. So we are discussing this hormone second messenger system, and to discuss further some topics. First is the CMP. We are going to see some functions of CMP. First is in the metabolism. We know this hormone glucagon in liver causes glycogenolysis. Glucagon in the liver causes glycogenolysis. This phenomenon of glucagon in the liver, which causing glycogenolysis, is regarded as the first time discovery of CMP as second messenger. It's the first time discovery of CMP as second messenger, where the action of glucagon in the liver with causing glycogenolysis. Second, we are going to see is water reabsorption. So water reabsorption through this hormone vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone. So vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone acts through this CMP as this second messenger. Vasopressin or ADH acts at the collecting duct level of the collecting duct, through which receptors, V2 receptors. So you need to remember the collecting duct, these are the V2 receptors. This CMP increases production of aquaporins. Increases the production of aquaporins for water reabsorption. These aquaporins, as we know, the transport channels of water across the earth through the cell membranes. These V2 receptors, the collecting duct, when vasopressin or ADH acts and the collecting duct, it increase the production of aquaporins for water reabsorption. Hence, water reabsorption happens, which is the hormone responsible, vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone, prevents diuresis. Third function we are going to see here is electrolyte secretion. This electrolyte secretion occurs through this hormone secretin. Secretin is the first hormone to be discovered. Know this fact, the first hormone to be discovered is the secretin. Secretin in the pancreas, it acts in the pancreas, it increases electrolyte, especially this bicarbonate secretion. This bicarbonate secretion in the pancreas is increased by the secretin. This is the reason it makes its nature alkaline. I'm going to discuss further about the secretin hormone, pancreas and bicarbonate secretion further in the GIT videos. For now, remember, this secretin increases the electrolyte, that is bicarbonate secretion, into the pancreatic fluid. Pancreatic secretion makes it more alkaline. So this is the function. For now, remember, this is to tackle the acidic nature of the chyme that is coming directly from the stomach into the intestine. So to tackle this acidic nature, this pancreatic secretion needs to be made alkaline. So these are the three types of functions of CMP, how it acts. It acts through the glucagon in the liver, acts through antidiuretic hormone, the collecting duct of kidneys for water reabsorption, and in the pancreas to increase the bicarbonate secretion, pancreatic secretion through hormone secretin. We are going to see some facts how this cyclic AMP further acts in our body. There are two toxins. Two toxins are, first is the cholera toxin. This cholera toxin it increases CMP levels. It increases CMP levels, which leads to NaCl secretion. We have seen this cholera toxin increases the CMP levels, which leads to NaCl secretion in stool. This NaCl secretion increases in the stool, leading to dehydration, water is lost, and diarrhea. Leading to dehydration and diarrhea. How this cholera toxin increases the CMP levels, which increases the sodium chloride secretion in the stools, leading to dehydration and diarrhea. And the second toxin we see here is the pertussis toxin. Pertussis toxin. Pertussis toxin also increases the CMP levels, which leads to increased sodium chloride secretion in sputum or the debris. Increased sodium chloride secretion in the sputum, leading to whooping cough. Whooping cough. This type of cough we have, the whooping cough, is due to this pertussis toxin, which increases the CMP levels and increased NaCl secretion in the sputum, the debris that gets lost in the respiratory pathway, leads to whooping cough. Fact we need to remember here is this cholera toxin acts through this activation of GS subunit. You've seen how this GS, there are three subunits of the alpha, further GS, GI and GQ. This cholera toxin acts through activation of GS subunits, and this pertussis toxin acts through inhibition of GI subunit. This GS, which is stimulatory, cholera toxin activates this. The pertussis toxin inhibits this GI, this I for inhibitory. When this GI is inhibited, it leads to further increase in CMP levels and whooping cough. When the stimulatory gets activated, it leads to dehydration and diarrhea by cholera toxin. So these two facts you need to remember how they act, important pathologically. So we have completed the discussion of CMP as the second messenger. Now we are going to see calcium second messenger. This calcium second messenger system. This calcium second messenger system acts two places. First, for contraction. Calcium causes contraction where the uterine muscle, uterine cervix to be precise, through this hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is a powerful constrictor of muscles, causes contraction uterine cervix when during parturition. During parturition oxytocin level increases further. It's an example of positive feedback mechanism we have seen in the homeostasis video. Calcium causes contraction through this hormone oxytocin during parturition. The next phenomenon we consider is constriction. This is contraction, this is constriction, both are different. This constriction, when occurs in the vessels, we call this as vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction occurs through this hormone vasopressin. We've seen vasopressin, or this antidiuretic hormone, which acts through, remember, B1 receptors. Above within the cyclic AMP, we have seen vasopressin acts for water reabsorption through B2 receptors in the collecting duct. But here, for vasoconstriction, this vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone acts with the B1 receptors. I'm going to see some B1 receptor actions, which other hormones also acts with this B1 receptor. First is endothelin. Endothelin is considered as one of the most powerful vasoconstrictor. Endothelin. Second is angiotensin. Third is this alpha receptor action of norepinephrine. Alpha receptor action of norepinephrine, angiotensin and endothelins. These are some of the powerful vasoconstrictors you've seen. Also, action of vasopressin or antidiuretic hormone, this V1 receptor. You've seen two action, contraction and constriction of calcium, where they act through which hormones. Now I'm going to see the third one, CGMP. CGMP acts through two functions we are going to see now. First one is relaxation. Second phenomenon is dilation. Although these two phenomena looks like similar, but they are entirely different. Relaxation and dilation are the function through which second messenger cyclic GMP. Contraction and constriction through which second messenger calcium. So CGMP, the general vasodilators, acts through this. What are the vasodilators? Nitric oxide. From which amino acid is derived? Arginine. It's an important question asked very frequently in recent examination. This nitric oxide derived from arginine, important vasodilator. Second one is natriuretic peptides. These natriuretic peptides are ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide. This B type natriuretic peptide, C type natriuretic peptide. This atrial, B type and C type natriuretic peptides are important vasodilators. They act through the cGMP, second messenger system. Also the nitric oxide. You've seen three types of second messenger system, and the G protein coupled receptor, how it acts through these three second messenger systems. Now we're going to see second type of extracellular receptor, tyrosine kinase. Tyrosine kinase. Tyrosine kinase is, remember, required for growth and differentiation. Tyrosine kinase is required for growth and differentiation. Some examples of hormones are insulin. So insulin acts through tyrosine kinase. Next one is the growth factors. For example, platelet derived growth factor. So this platelet derived growth factor, or PDGF, platelet derived growth factor, and insulin acts through tyrosine kinase receptors. Next one we are going to discuss is the Janus kinase receptor, JK receptors. These act through activating the start pathway. The start pathway, the Janus kinase receptors, JAK receptors activate and act through it. So these are commonly called JAK STAT pathway. JAK STAT pathway. Which hormones acts through this? The all important growth hormone. Growth hormone actually acts through 4 types of different pathways, but most important here is the JAK STAT pathway. Next one is the prolactin. Third one is the, remember, erythropoietin. Very important. Growth hormone, prolactin and erythropoietin from liver. Erythropoietin, when activated, acts through this Janus kinase pathway. Next we are going to see is serine kinase receptors. Serine kinase receptors. These are receptors that, remember, associated with hormones with reproduction. Hormones associated with reproduction acts through serine kinase receptors. Which, for example, activin. Activin is an important hormone that increases FSH levels. It's a protein hormone, activin, which increases FSH levels. Next hormone is the anti-Mullerian hormone, or the anti-Mullerian factor. Anti-Mullerian hormone or anti-Mullerian factor acts through serine kinase along with this activin, which increases FSH levels. So we've seen the extracellular receptors: serine kinase, Janus kinase, tyrosine kinase. They are all important. GPCR, which acts through second messenger system. Now we are going to see, we've seen all the extracellular receptors. Now we are going to see the intracellular receptors. Intracellular receptors, as we discussed from the starting, these are two types. So either present in the cytoplasm, so cytoplasmic receptors, or present in the nucleus, or nuclear receptors. Intracellular receptors are of two types: this cytoplasmic receptors in the cytoplasm, and in the nucleus, nuclear receptors. To see some examples of cytoplasmic receptors, which hormones act. First is the aldosterone. Aldosterone acts through the mineralocorticoid receptor. It's a mineralocorticoid, so it acts through mineralocorticoid receptor. Next one is cortisol, acts through, it's a glucocorticoid, so glucocorticoid receptors. Third hormone is testosterone. Testosterone acts through, it's an androgen, so androgen receptors. Fourth one is the vitamin D, which acts through the vitamin D receptors. Vitamin D receptors. From all this, we have seen that the steroid hormones and the vitamin D, which crosses the cell membrane easily, the steroid hormones and the vitamins which crosses the cell membrane utilizes this cytoplasmic receptors, is the aldosterone, cortisol, testosterone, and vitamin D through their respective receptors. We are going to see certain hormones using nuclear receptors. These are first important: thyroid hormones. Thyroid hormones have the receptors on the nucleus. Second is the vitamin A receptor. We've seen this vitamin D has cytoplasmic receptor. This vitamin A has nuclear receptors. Remember this difference. Then there is this estrogen receptor. The fourth one is progesterone receptor. So although these hormones crosses cell membrane easily, they do not act on the same type of receptors. Aldosterone, cortisol, testosterone, vitamin D acts through cytoplasmic, and the thyroid hormones and vitamin A acts through the nuclear receptor. The two female hormones, estrogen and progesterone, also acts through the nuclear receptors. Then to remember these two types of intracellular receptors. So we are going to see one example how one of these receptor acts. For the aldosterone, we have seen there is a mineralocorticoid receptors. Mineralocorticoid receptor. In short, we are going to write this as MR. We are going to see how it acts here. Suppose this is a cell. This is a cell where the aldosterone acts. This aldosterone, it crosses the cell membrane, and goes to the cytoplasm. Well, we already established this fact. Steroid hormones crosses the cell membrane and goes to the cytoplasm. After going into the cytoplasm, in the cytoplasm we see there is this aldosterone. This receptor is called mineralocorticoid receptors. This mineralocorticoid receptors is combined with these heat shock proteins. This mineralocorticoid receptor are combined with heat shock proteins. So these are in a inactive state. And combined with the heat shock proteins, which are also called as the chaperones, we must know, combined with the mineralocorticoid receptors, are in an inactive state. So when this aldosterone crosses the cell membrane, goes to the cytoplasm, it goes and attaches to its mineralocorticoid receptor. It attaches to its mineralocorticoid receptors. Aldosterone attaches with its mineralocorticoid receptors, which then becomes active. From this inactive state, aldosterone attaches with the mineralocorticoid receptors and make it active. This forms a hormone receptor complex. Hormone receptor complex. The HRC hormone receptor complex is formed, which then goes to the nucleus for further actions. It's simple to understand. I'm going to see again. Aldosterone comes to its cell on which it will act, crosses the cell membrane and goes to the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm, we have seen it has mineralocorticoid receptors, but unfortunately it is combined with the heat shock proteins, so it's an inactive state. So what this aldosterone does, it go and combines with the mineralocorticoid receptor and make it active. Upon this activation, it forms a HRC. What is the HRC? Hormone receptor complex. Remember, this hormone receptor complex goes to the nucleus, not the hormone. This hormone receptor complex goes to the nucleus, which leads to some further actions. There will be transcription and translation of proteins, and there will be mRNA formation, and which will lead to the further actions. Remember, this aldosterone goes to receptor, cytoplasmic receptor. The hormone receptor complex goes to the nucleus, not the hormone. So, see in this example how cytoplasmic receptor act. Now we are going to see important concepts about these hormones. First, we are going to see is down regulation of receptors. There is a function going on. There is a down regulation receptors. How this down regulation when receptors happens through three ways of down regulating the receptors. First one is internalization of receptors. Receptors get sucked inside the cell. Internalization of receptors. Second is desensitization of receptors. There is internalization of receptors and desensitization of receptors. This desensitization of receptors leads to some modifications. This modification leads to the receptors being less responsive. This modification in the receptors leading to receptors being less sensitive is desensitization. Sensitivity of the receptors are reduced. The final one is this inactivation of receptors. Receptors are inactivated for all. There is this internalization, desensitization, and inactivation of receptors comes under this down regulation of receptors. So, to see another topic, there is the receptors for neurotransmitters. This topic I have left. the receptor for neurotransmitters. Here we have two types. First one is ligand gated. These receptors are ligand gated, so are called ionotropic receptors. It's ligand gated receptors or ionotropic receptors. Second one is metabotropic receptors. It's ligand gated ionotropic receptors and metabotropic receptors. You see one by one. In this ligand gated, these are linked to ion channels. These are linked to ion channels. They open and cause fast response. This we need to understand. They open, when they open, the ligand gated the link to ion channels, they cause fast response. These are responsible for the fast response. For example, some of the neurotransmitters such as GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, and universal depressing neurotransmitter GABA. This GABA, we have two subforms, GABA A and GABA C. We have actually three forms, GABA A, GABA B and GABA C. Out of this GABA A and GABA C acts through the ligand gated ionotropic channels. Next example are nicotinic cholinergic receptors. Nicotinic cholinergic receptors, and GABA A and GABA C form of GABA. This ligand gated ionotropic receptors. In this metabotropic receptors, they act through G protein coupled receptors. So it obviously depends on second messenger system. Second messenger system. So this show slow response. This metabotropic receptors in comparison with the ionotropic receptors show slow response. These ionotropic receptors show fast response. Example, we have seen GABA A and GABA C are with ligand gated ionotropic receptors. Here we have GABA B. As I've said, there are three forms of GABA: GABA A, GABA B and GABA C receptors. This GABA A and C with ligand gated and GABA B with metabotropic. Here we have seen nicotinic cholinergic receptors which are associated with ion channels. Here we have muscarinic cholinergic receptor for acetylcholine. Acetylcholine, important neurotransmitter. Pardon me for the spelling. This is muscarinic cholinergic receptors for acetylcholine, which are example of metabotropic receptors. These nicotinic cholinergic receptors are examples of ligand gated ionotropic receptors. Last piece of information we are going to see. There is this drug called ruxolitinib. Ruxolitinib, an important drug form used for treatment of polycythemia vera. Used for this treatment of polycythemia vera. Polycythemia vera, as we know, increased number of RBC beyond its normal level, reaching nearly 7.5 to 8 million RBCs per millimeter cube. This treatment of polycythemia vera. This is a Janus kinase blocker. As you have seen above, in the above discussion, you have seen this erythropoietin, That's why I said, remember, this erythropoietin acts through the Janus kinase receptors. So erythropoietin, we know, increases the number of RBC, production of RBC. So this drug, ruxolitinib, used for treatment of polycythemia vera, this is a Janus kinase blocker. We're going to see further how this drug acts in the pathology section. For now, remember, it is a Janus kinase blocker. So this is all about the cellular messenger and receptors. Cellular messenger are the hormones. We have seen the 4 types of classification of hormones. Then we have seen the receptors, the classification of receptors, the G protein coupled receptors, the extracellular and the intracellular receptors, the cytoplasmic and the nuclear receptors, the hormones acting through them. And we have seen down regulation of the receptors for neurotransmitters. So this is all about cellular messenger receptors. Make sure to revise them, guys. Very important topic. Thank you. I will catch you in the next one. Good luck.